The Sixth Year, Part 1. For a year, things went beautifully at Silverbush. Everybody was happy. Mother was better than she had been for a long time. Sid seemed to have recovered his good spirits and was taking a keen interest in everything again. Gossip no longer coupled his name with any girls's, and Pat saw her old dream of living always at Silverbush with Sid taking vague shape again. It was just like it used to be. They planned and joked and walked in faint blue twilights, and Sid told her everything, and together they bullied Long Alec and Tillytuck when any difference of opinion came up. Between them, they managed to get Silverbush repainted, although Long Alec hated any extra expense as long as there was a mortgage on it. But Silverbush looked beautiful, so white and trig and prosperous with its green shutters and trim. It warmed the cockles of Pat's heart just to look at it. And to hear Sid say once, gruffly, on their return one winter evening from a long prowl back to their secret field, "You're a good old scout, Pat. I don't know what I'd have done without you these past 2 years." "Oh, Sid." Pat could only say that as she rubbed her face against his shoulder. This was one of life's good moments. They had had such a wonderful walk. It had been lovely back in the woods. It was after the first snowfall, and the woods were at peace in a white transfiguration, placidly still and calm, where the thick ranks of the young saplings were snow-laden, and an occasional warm golden shaft of light from the low-hanging sun pierced through, tinging the dark bronze green of the spruces and the grayish-green stems of moss with vivid beauty. They had come home by way of happiness, where Jordan was crooning to itself under the ice. The old pastures, which had been so beautiful and flowery in June, were cold and white now, but Pat loved them as she loved them in all moods. She lingered at the gate to taste her happiness after Sid had gone on to the barn. It was going to be a night of frost and silver. To her right, the garden was hooding itself in the shadows of dusk. Pat loved to think of all her staunch old flowers under the banks of snow, waiting for spring. Far away, a dim hill came out darkly against the winter sunset. Beyond the dike was a group of old spruces, which Long Alec often said should be cut down, but Pat pleaded for them. Seen in daylight, they were old and uncomely, dead almost to the top, with withered branches. But seen in this enchanted light, against a sky that began by being rosy saffron and continued in silver green and ended in crystal blue, they were like tall, slender witch women, weaving spells of necromancy in a rune of olden days. Pat felt a stirring of her childish desire to share in their gramarye, to have fellowship in their twilight sorceries. Off to her left, the orchard was white and still, heaped with drifts along the fences. Over it all was a delicate tracery of shadow, where the trees stood up lifeless in seeming death and sorrow. But it was only seeming. The lifeblood was in their hearts, and by it would stir, and they would clothe themselves in bridal garments of young green leaves and pink blossoms, and lush grass would wave where the snow was now laying, and golden buttercups dance among it. Spring always came again. She must never forget that. Silverbush looked very beautiful in the faint beginning moonlight. Her own dear Silverbush. It still welcomed her. It was still hers, no matter what changes came and went. Life seemed to have put on a new meaning now that Sid had come back to her in their old companionship. She put his love about her like a cloak, and felt warm and satisfied. Ray had settled down to filling a hope chest and writing daily letters of portentous length to Brock Hamilton. She was changed, more gentle, thoughtful, womanly. There was no more pretending to be hard-boiled. Love, Sid told her teasingly, did mellow people remarkably. The old flippancy was gone, though she laughed as much as ever, and never had her laughter, thought adoring Pat, been so exquisite. Pat had resigned herself to the fact of Ray's engagement, but she would not be getting married for at least 3 years. They had those years to look forward to. Years, dreamed Pat, of companionship and plans and all the dear intimacies of home. Winter slipped away, and spring and summer passed. September wore a golden moon like a ring, and again autumn brewed a cup of magic and held it to your lips. Only Tillytuck secretly thought it rather slow. The beaux came no longer, since Ray was known to be bespoken, and Pat, so it was said, thought no one good enough for her. "Life is getting a bit tedious here, Judy," he said mournfully. "There doesn't seem to be as much glamour, romantically speaking." Perhaps Judy thought so too. She sighed. It was not like Judy to sigh. Pat would have another birthday in a week, and not a beau in sight. Even David, Judy had decided, had really no serious intentions, and she hated him for it as sincerely as if she had never disapproved of him. She did not want Pat to marry him, but that was for Pat to decide, not for him. As for Jingle, there never was any word of his coming home for a visit. "He's grown away from us, Judy. We're only memories to him now. He has his own work and his own ambitions. Even his letters aren't just what they used to be." Pat hadn't seemed to care. She was more taken up with Silverbush than ever, and she and Sid were thick as thieves again, which was all to the good, as far as it went. To be sure, of late weeks, Sid had taken to gallivanting again. Nobody could find out where he was going, although Judy had certain uneasy suspicions she never breathed to anyone. Judy sighed again as she clapped her baked beans and bacon in the oven. Then she brightened up. Everyone needed a little bite, once in so often, and as long as she, Judy Plum, could provide it, there was balm in Gilead. A week later, Judy looked back to that day and wondered if what had happened had been a judgment on her for thinking life had got a bit dull. For Pat's birthday had come, and that evening Sid had brought May Binney in and announced, curtly and defiantly, and yet with such a pitiful, beaten look on his face, that they had been married that day in Charlottetown. "We thought we'd surprise you," said May, glancing archly about her out of bold, brilliant eyes. "Birthday surprise for you, Pat."